On December 15th of 1944, Francisco Alves Mendes Filho, best known as Chico Mendes, was born into a poor rubber-tapping family in the municipality of Chapuri, in the state of Acre. Chico's family was one of the many rubber-tapping families that settled in the Amazon rainforest at the turn of the 19th century during the rubber boom. The rights of the rubber tappers had been violated by the landowners for over a century. At the age of 18, Mendes had an opportunity that very few people in the Amazon received. Euclides Távora, Mendes' mentor, taught him how to read and write.
I wanted to learn to read and write, to discover the exploitation in which we live. We were being robbed and exploited by the big landowners, the patrões. And we couldn't do anything because we didn't know how to count or read.
During the mid-1900s, the prices of rubber in Brazil dropped. This decline lessened the power of the landowners and gained some freedom for the laborers. Mendes took advantage of this freedom and made use of the skills that Euclides Távora taught him. Mendes wrote letters to President Humberto Castelo describing the suffering of laborers in the forest. However, the government ignored his efforts. Mendes also took advantage of this unstable period to persuade rubber tappers to collectively sell their rubber, rather than giving it to their bosses. Despite his efforts, Mendes received little support from the tappers because most of them were unaware of the injustices they were living, so they found no need for change.
It was not until 1964, when the military took control of the government, that laborers began to long for change. One of the military's primary goals was to flood the Amazon rainforest with civilization. According to the government, this would promote economic growth, prevent other countries from taking control of the area, and serve as land for surplus population. In 1970, Brazil created a $60 billion plan to develop the Amazon. This project was funded by loans from Japan, the United States, Europe, and the World Bank. Soon, networks of roads were being constructed connecting the industrialized region of Brazil to the Amazon. The government used the slogan, "A land for the people without land," to attract people to the area. Quickly, huge waves of landless poor were taking control of Amazonian lands. Roberto Santos, a Brazilian economist, estimated that about 200,000 to 400,000 people had moved into the region along the first highways by the 1970s. The creation of roads and the settlements of newcomers caused major deforestation, especially in the southern region of the Amazon.
Because of the decline in rubber prices, the governor of Acre, Wanderley Dantas, proposed to change the state's economic basis from rubber production to livestock production in 1970. He promoted the land by describing it as the new Canaan. Soon, waves of wealthy cattle ranchers began to flow into Acre.
Poor people were forced to leave. The big farmers had taken over, and the small farmers had to sell their land to the big ones. Otherwise, the cows would eat all they had planted, and then the small farmers were forced to leave their land. There's no law for poor people.
Violence, intimidation, and extortion were common practices used by ranchers to convince laborers to give up their lands, often leaving them landless. Within 10 years, almost half of the state's territory was in the hands of 10 landowners.
The government continued to maintain a strict control on the people of the Amazon to prevent any uprisings. Any union movement was shut down, and activists were often jailed or tortured. However, many began to realize that the power of the ranchers could only be taken down through an organized effort. In 1971, Mendes began to teach a small group of rubber tappers how to read and write. The Catholic Church preached about the liberation theology to cultivate leadership among the laborers, to enable them to fight for justice. In 1974, union movements began to take root in Acre. Union organizers taught laborers how to read, write, and their basic rights. It was in 1975 when the first large rural workers' union was established in Brasilia. Euclides Távora had told Mendes, "You shouldn't stay out of a union movement just because it is yellow. You must join it to organize the grassroots, spread your ideas, and strengthen the movement." Mendes did exactly as he was told and joined the union. His higher level of education gave him an advantage over the other union members.
Chico began to have great leadership among the rubber tappers. The rubber tappers saw Chico as their father.
The most common and effective tactic practiced in unions were empates. During empates, a large group of rubber tappers would arrive at the huts of workers hired to deforest the land to make them leave the land. Empates are often depicted as peaceful. However, they were violent showdowns. In 1977, the movement of rubber tappers began to take a more independent course. That same year, Mendes was elected as councilman for Chapuri. Mendes wasn't very successful as a political leader. However, he did fight to establish a branch of the River Tappers Union, schools, and health all in Chapuri. As a leader of the union, Mendes insisted on a non-violent approach. However, he was in favor of the embates because tappers argued that it was a defensive action.
Mendes developed a unique way of spreading the movement. When he arrived at an area, he would not try to convince the tappers to join the union immediately. Instead, Mendes would arrive at the tappers' houses and patiently listen to their problems until he personally gained their trust. The ability that Mendes had of listening to people was the key element that gained him support. Through the efforts of Mendes and the leaders of Brazil's Indian tribes, the rubber tappers and the Indians set aside decades of rivalry under the alliance of the people of the forest to fight a common enemy, the ranchers and the miners that had flooded the rainforest. The rubber tappers union continued using empates, and they adopted a new tactic, human barricades. Union members would stand in front of bulldozers, forming human chains to stop the machines from deforesting the land. With the help of Maria Allegretti, the president of the Institute of Amazon Studies, and other rubber tappers, Mendes created a proposal for the establishment of extractive reserves in the Amazon.
Chico was a person who understood the proposal deeply and became the most important defender of this idea. Every place he went, he talked about it. He understood that the extractive reservation was a new alternative and started to promote this proposal with all his strength.
With the proposal of extractive reserves, rubber tappers did not intend to own the land. Instead, they wanted the state to own it and for the tappers to have the rights to use it. Extractive products like rubber, nuts, fruits, and medicinal products exist naturally in the Amazon rainforest, and they can be productively harvested without damaging the land.
An enormous variety of products can be derived from the bounty of the forest, and extractive enterprises can be twice as profitable per acre as cattle ranching.
The union had gained national support. However, it still lacked international support to make the movement successful. During the late 1970s, Acre became a more attractive state for social scientists and for people that intended to end the exploitation of rural workers. Mendes befriended these people, and they soon became the international connections that the rubber tapper union needed to succeed. In 1980, Mendes was invited by an international environmentalist to attend a conference of the Inter-American Development Bank.
My interest in going was not as much to listen to the conference, but more to tell the directorate of the IDB that the projects that they were financing in my country were serving only to ruin the lives of thousands of workers in the forest.
Later that year, Mendes traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet legislators, senators, and congressmen to convince them to stop financing development projects and to propose the financing of extractive reserves in the Amazon rainforest.
Suddenly, the proposal of extractive reserves was like the discovery of gunpowder for the international environmentalists, who were concerned about the Amazon but did not know what to propose for its protection. Because the protection of the Amazon for its own sake, that is, the untouchable forest, always met with the argument that we cannot leave such a sanctuary alone. Such a sanctuary has to be productive. We could not leave 10 million acres, 5 million square kilometers unproductive. They always hit an economic argument.
We are very proud of having been linked to him and having received his advice. The activities that the bank is doing now in the Amazonia with the government of Brazil benefited from the advice of Chico Mendes.
Soon, the efforts of Chico Mendes were rewarded. The World Bank stopped financing the development projects in Brazil. In June 1988, thanks to international pressure that was exerted on Brazil's government by the international press and environmental groups, the first legitimate extractive reserve was established in the Amazon. This was only the beginning of the rubber tappers movement. Unfortunately, Chico Mendes did not live to see the success that this movement had. After receiving several death threats on December of 1988, Mendes was assassinated. Nevertheless, this did not stop the movement. In fact, the death of Mendes increased international attention on the rubber tappers struggle.
On November 16th of 1994, the International Bank began financing extractive reserves. 10 years after Mendes' death, his allies took important positions in the government and called themselves the Government of the Forest. They established a number of green, low-carbon development policies designed to protect the state of Acre. Although deforestation is still a major problem in the Amazon today, there are at least 48 extractive reserves established in Brazil covering 12 billion hectares of the Amazon.